does Vladimir Putin believe, and what does he want?
We all would like to know the answer to that question, Peter. We don't get a chance to ask him personally. I wish that I was sitting behind the camera and he was sitting in this chair, and the best interviewer on the West Coast was sitting across from him, like is sitting across from me right now, and would ask him those questions. And then we would hear it. We've had a couple of very revealing interviews with people, including Oliver Stone's, which allowed Putin to speak. And Putin has made some dramatic public interventions, beginning with that Munich speech, that infamous speech in 2007 at the Munich Security Conference. So we have a sense of what he thinks. But of course, he keeps us guessing, and he may not know. So this is going to be a supposition. I'm going to go a little bit around and sideways back in rather than frontal on this one, if you'll permit.
Stephen, I'll just watch. You're the best show in town.
It's very kind of you. So when the Russian Empire collapsed in the First World War, and there was the Russian Revolution, people assumed that that was it. Russia was gone. The Habsburg Empire, Austria-Hungary collapsed, and it didn't come back. The Ottoman Empire collapsed, and it didn't come back. And the Russian Empire collapsed along with the monarchy. It dissolved. And people thought, it's a goner, it's finished. But it did come back. And it came back pretty quickly. Within a generation. It was once again an industrializing, powerful country that you couldn't ignore in the international system. But the entire Versailles Treaty, which was about punishing Germany alone for the war and excluding the Soviet Union entirely from the Versailles Accord. And so Russia wanted to revise the Versailles settlement, the World War I settlement. It was imposed on them. They didn't like the world order that came out of World War I. Remember, Germany won the war on the Eastern Front in March 1918. There was the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk.
Yes.
Germany lost the war on the Western Front, which invalidated the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk and made Germany a loser on both sides. But Russia was excluded and its territory had diminished. Independent Poland came back into existence. Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia became independent states. Part of the Russian Empire, that is today Ukraine, went into independent Poland. So Russia retreated farther from Europe and was excluded from the settlement. They didn't like the settlement. At first, they couldn't do anything about it. But over time, they acquired the wherewithal. Let's call that the tanks and the airplanes and the trained engineers and the trained officers. They acquired the wherewithal to act on their desire to revise the Versailles settlement. We know how all that worked out.
Right.
Fast forward to 1991. A settlement is imposed. The Soviet Union dissolves. The United States pronounces itself, properly so, the victor. We stood up to that regime through thick and thin over various generations, including Republican and Democrat both. It was the right thing to do. There were mistakes on our side, but the Cold War was right and necessary, and it had a colossal role in putting pressure on that system, producing a reformer, a socialist with a human face ideologue, who liquidated that system unintentionally while trying to insert dynamism again to face the West. The settlement is imposed. The West expanded. The EU expanded. NATO expanded. And the territory of Russia had been diminished even more after 1991 than after 1918. They had no possibility to revise that settlement that they didn't like. Boris Yeltsin would make speeches about how this was no good, and we don't like this, like that, the big bear that he was. And so what? Bill Clinton would just push NATO farther along, George Bush would push NATO farther along, and there we are today. But lo and behold, Russian power came back, something that people assumed would not happen, or if it did happen, it would come back in democratic fashion, because they would have markets and private property, right. They would grow a middle class, they would be integrated into the world economy, and Pygmalion style, we would remake them into a small junior partner of the United States and the West. And so, of course, that didn't work, because they have a sense of themselves as a special nation with a special mission in the world, a providential power, and they reacquired the wherewithal to do something about the settlement that was imposed by us, the victors, that they didn't like. And so they can now do something the same way that the post-World War I Soviet Union acquired that wherewithal to revise the settlement. And that's what's going on, has been going on for some time, and is going on today. So that's what he's about. He's about revising the settlement. So he issues public treaties. They published the treaties that he wants with the U.S. and NATO, calling for a rollback of the settlement that has been enacted since 1991. And if they don't get it, they may do it themselves militarily. So that's the situation that we're in, which was foreseeable because it happened before. It happened before under a different kind of regime. The Putin regime is not the Stalin regime.
Right.
The Stalin category is a small category. It includes Mao and Hitler. Putin is not in that category. But nonetheless, you see the phenomenon. And so for us, it's understanding that mentality, understanding as well the vulnerabilities, and understanding that we're America and we can have diplomats again. We can have diplomacy again. So we can go on the offensive diplomatically.
So one more. We've only got through 2 of my 5 questions, but one more, a follow-up on this one. Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party are communist. You said a moment ago, some of them really believe it. And so there's, among those who believe it, they have expansionist aims. Communism says this is the ultimate end for all mankind, not just China, all mankind. And Vladimir Putin is a Russian.
Yes.
He's not a communist, he's a Russian. He stands in a tradition of 1,000 years of trying to assert dominance over that huge Eurasian landmass. So why don't we let him have it? What is our interest in the Donbass region of Ukraine? Why should we even have been concerned when he annexed, I think is the technical term, when he annexed Crimea? Sebastopol, the Russian port on the Black Sea, I looked it up the other day, it was established in 1783 by Catherine the Great.
Yes.
It's a Russian holding.
Yes.
Let him expand, because that's all he's interested in. He just wants to be Russian, and we can live with that.
Xi Jinping is also a Chinese nationalist.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that he inherited a communist regime and had a communist upbringing. But he's trying to preserve the power of that regime, but also promote Chinese nationalism. Putin has a personal regime. It's not fully institutionalized. We're not sure how it works because it's got narrower and narrower and narrower at the top. The inner circle is smaller than ever, and we don't really have interlocutors with those people, as we did previously when the regime was a little bit less narrow, and the second echelon participated in discussions about policy and we had access to them, and the first echelon was wider. So we're not sure. This is what we know for sure, though. What we know is they're afraid. They're afraid of their own people, and they're afraid of American power. They're more afraid of American power than we are proud of American power. We think democracy promotion is how we lead. Well, at least some of us think that. In fact, it's just the very existence of our system that threatens both the Russian regime and the Chinese regime today. We are an example of how freedom operates in practice, imperfectly, with all sorts of the chaos and cacophony that we know is America as well as other democracies. And that's ipso facto a threat to them. Hong Kong was a threat. Taiwan is a threat. The United States, by its very existence, is a threat to them because it's a different kind of system that could interest their people.
Right.
And so we don't have to promote democracy, and we're still threatening them every day. So how do they respond to our threat? Because we exist. And the way they respond to it is they want to divide. They want to divide our alliances. They want to divide our country. They want to weaken us so that we don't understand that we are more powerful, that we have a better military, a better financial system, that we have corrective mechanisms in our political system, that we have deep and dynamic markets, and that no matter what goes wrong in a private economy, there are corrective mechanisms to create new jobs and to pull us out of slums. We have what they don't have. We have just a tremendous, can't-be-bottled American power across all dimensions and self-correcting mechanisms. We forget, but that's who we are and what we have. And they know that. And so for them, they must counteract that. We have alliance systems, they must divide them. We have rule of law, they must have propaganda saying that our rule of law doesn't work, that it's unfair, that it's corrupt, or whatever it might be, and fill in the blank. I don't mind that they do that. It doesn't frighten me. I'm not frightened by them. I expect them to do that. What I don't like, and what scares me a little bit, is when we do that to ourselves. When we denigrate our institutions, when we say that we're a terrible system, when we say that American power is imperialist, when we say things that the communist Chinese and the Russian nationalists say about ourselves, and we bash ourselves. Now, we have freedom here, and people are allowed to say things like that. And we have a lot of institutions and a lot of trends which need correction and can be improved. And fortunately, we're allowed to discuss that freely in the public realm. But at the same time, let's not forget who we are, where we came from, what our strengths are. Nobody in Russia or China can destroy America. Only people in America can do that.
All right. I'll return to that in a moment.